Thanks. Call this meeting of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. Director Kluhl, would you read our board priorities, please?
Sure, glad to. One of the most important things that the school board does is to make sure that they have addressed the issues of the public's values, and that's actually why we were elected to make that happen, and it's a very important thing. And in the spirit of trying to make sure that we address the public's values, we established the following two priorities. Those are, number one, to provide leadership and direction to improve the overall learning environment in our classrooms, schools, and district, including the health, safety, security, and happiness of students and staff. And number two, to direct and support actions, programs, and activities which reduce the impacts of poverty on our students, their families, and our community.
Thank you. Director Crumwoody, would you read our mission and vision statements?
Me too.
Our vision, education that challenges conventional thinking, prepares all students to compete in a global society, and inspires our students, parents, and staff and community to answer the question, what if? Our mission is to enhance each student's abilities by providing a quality education enriched by our diverse community.
Thank you. Superintendent Tate, we'll move on to student board reports.
Thank you, Mr. President. Luke, let's start with you and move down the tables.
Our show choir choreography week is going on this week, so that's why neither of the other two girls are here. Our blood drive is tomorrow, so everyone's getting ready for that. We had quite a few artists have displays at the Festival of Trees, and our swim team got second at the West Invite on Saturday.
West Speech and Debate team recently this weekend hosted the Harold Keller Memorial Tournament, which honored Harold Keller, our longtime coach at Dav West, 35 years of service, as well as national service as the director of the NFL for a short stint of time, and the creator of the Congressional Debate event.
Well, we had the Messiah concert again this year, or I guess it's the winter concert, but it went very well, as always. We tried our hardest and it worked out, and then Austin Robertson got Best at Show at the Festival of Trees.
Upcoming this weekend, we have the children's show for Puss in Boots, and also we will be including with that a children's workshop from 9 to 1:30 where kids can go through and learn acting and theater at North High School. That includes dancing, makeup, and set design as well.
Last Friday we had our blood drive and it was very successful. We raised 96 units.
Mr. President, that concludes the presentation from the student board members.
All right. Thank you very much. Move on to Showcase. Superintendent Tate.
I call upon Principal Corbin, J.B. Young. Thank you for being here tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you. One of the benefits of Davenport Community School is its diversity. And with a diverse student population, we also have the opportunity for our students and staff alike to develop empathy. The individuals I've brought with me tonight have gone beyond just developing that life skill of empathy and put that into some compassionate action. With me tonight are some of the hands behind the Snack Pack Backpack program. I'm going to introduce at this time two of the adults who are key players in this at JB Young. They ensure that the implementation is seamless. So if you'd like to join me, Gaina Stottleman, if you want to come forward, and Steve Hahn. Steve Hahn is our counselor, and Gaina again will describe more in detail the program.
Not really.
Oh, sure. All right.
All right. My name is Luke Hanzi, and I am one of the student leaders of the Snack Backpack program. I have worked with this program since its beginning. I started by helping by going to the food bank in the mornings before school began when I was in 8th grade. I'd help Miss Stottleman pack her SUV with cases of food off the loading dock. Tonight I would like to introduce some of the volunteers with the program. Down at the end we have Pastor Ralph Kelly. He is a pastor at First Baptist Church and is president of People Uniting Neighbors and Churches, or PUNCH. We have Ty Lawson and Joel Bailey. Tyler is a senior at Central and has helped pack backpacks with the program since 9th grade. Joel is a junior at Central and has packed and delivered bags since his freshman year. We have Gaina Stottleman, a parent volunteer who got the program started at J.B. Young in Sudlow. This is Eric Stottleman and Nick Maroka, 11th graders at Central High School. They have been volunteers with this program since 8th grade as well. Both of them are going to help explain about the program. Ms. Stottleman is going to talk about the history of the program. Eric is going to explain how the program works, and Nick is going to share some of the statistics we have. Ms. Stottleman.
So a little brief history about the program. In the fall of 2010, I went to one of Eric's soccer games at BSA, and I was the only parent from Davenport Schools, and one of the parents gathered us all up, and she said, can you guys come closer? I'd like to get a snack backpack program started at Bettendorf Middle School. She was asking us to donate backpacks and food. Her goal was to get 188 backpacks filled with healthy snacks. She hadn't worked out all the plans, but she just wondered if there was support in the community. That parent was Pepper Trahan. Clearly, when I went home that day, I wondered, geez, if Bettendorf Middle School needs 188 backpacks, what would the middle schools at Davenport need? I thought maybe I would be able to commit to doing about 100 bags. My target start date was September of 2011. I called Luke Hanzi's mom, Sue, told her my story, and she agreed to help me. Slowly, I started introducing the idea to some of my friends, and one of my friends was the parish nurse at First Presbyterian Church. She told me she had a group that might be interested in helping me. She gave me a flyer for Punch with Pastor Kelly's information. Pastor Kelly and I spoke a couple of times, and we decided that at one of their meetings I would come and present the Snack Backpack program to Punch, and at that meeting they agreed to sponsor the food. So I contacted the principal at Sudlow, and we talked about the project. He seemed enthusiastic and supportive. I agreed to ask parents to donate the backpacks. I contacted Miriam Rink and asked her if she would write an announcement for the Sudlow e-blast, and would she send out an email to her donor list for after prom for Central and North. She agreed. We got a very favorable response. I was able to purchase all of the backpacks, and Embroider Me, the shop up on 53rd, volunteered and numbered all of the backpacks for us. So in September of 2011, we distributed our first snack backpacks, 50 to Sudlow and 50 to J.B. Young. Eric?
At the beginning of every school year, we set a calendar of days that we will pack and deliver the bags to school. The schools identify the students that will be receiving the backpacks and send a permission slip home to see if the family would like to participate in the program. The backpacks are numbered, and each student's identity is kept confidential. The student must return the bag at the end of every month in order to stay in the program. We order the food online from the River Food Bank the week before the packing date. The items that we put in the bag are as following: juice, cereal, peanut butter, jelly, and granola bars. The day before the bags are packed, the food is picked up from the food bank. If any of the food is unavailable at the food bank, it is then purchased at a local grocery store. There are 2 volunteers from Punch, Evelyn and Ward Dorothy, who pick up the backpacks from JB and Sudlow and deliver them to the sports entrance at Central. The Central students unpack the food from the SUV and set up an assembly line and pass the bags down the line. Sudlow backpacks are packed first because Sudlow is farther away and we need more time to deliver and leave the parking lot before the buses arrive to pick up the students at the end of the school day. About half the students help deliver the backpacks to the schools while the remaining students stay at Central and clean up and break down the boxes. The Dorothys take the boxes to be recycled. Any leftover food is returned and stored at the First Baptist Church. One of my responsibilities is to coordinate and remind all the students that it is Backpack Wednesday. Nick.
Hi, my name's Nick Maroka, and I have the stats of the program. Our goal is to distribute 100 backpacks per month filled with healthy snacks. Our budget is $5 per bag. Each backpack is filled with approximately 13 pounds of food. And if we distribute 100 bags per month and each bag is 13 pounds, we deliver approximately 1,300 pounds of food per month. And with 9 school months per year that we deliver and 1,300 pounds of food per month, we deliver about 11,700 pounds of food per year. And we've been running this program for a little over 3 years now, and so that totals up to about 35,100 pounds of food.
I do not have a measure for how successful this program is for the students who receive the backpacks, but I do have a measure for how successful it has been for the students who pack the backpacks. I have watched all of the volunteers grow in leadership, from being students that need to be told what to do every step of the way, to volunteers who show up early and get the job done quickly and efficiently without needing much direction. It's pretty awesome. I can attest that these guys have become observant of their environment. They are watching and listening and recognizing when there is a need to be filled. They are more sensitive to their peers. I know that some of the students that have already graduated have continued on in other volunteer programs. I find that to be one of the most rewarding pieces of this program, that the students continue to volunteer. Thank you for letting us come tonight.
Are there any, no, hang on a couple minutes here. Okay, any questions or comments by the board? Director Snyder.
Yeah, I just wanted to commend you guys. This is an outstanding program. I do have a question on how you had mentioned you number the backpacks, but how are you able to maintain the anonymity for these kids and these families? I would think that would be fairly difficult.
We don't. It's done at the school level. We don't have any idea that no information is on the bags. We drop them off to the office.
Okay.
So we don't give them to the students at all.
I'm just curious how these students would get them, and if.
Really, that's my responsibility at school.
Go ahead and speak into the microphone. Thanks.
Gaina more or less lets me know how many backpacks to expect every month, and then we have assigned them to students, and I'm probably the only one that knows which backpack number goes to which student. So I call them down one time per month throughout the year and have the student take their backpack home, they return it, we just do it every month.
Okay.
I know at Sudlow they're kept in the counselor's office.
Oh, I need you to speak in the microphone.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I know that at Sudlow the bags are kept up in the counselor's office. Deb Kuntz keeps them, and she calls the students down one at a time, and she hands them the bag privately over the course of the day on Fridays, on the day that they're distributed.
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, I'll start by thanking all of you. The students appreciate your commitment. It's a big deal, and it makes a difference. And for the folks from the community, this is it's an enormous thing. We shortly, a while back, a year or so ago, we adopted a priority on our board to work on the issues of poverty and how they affect our students. You were working that issue before we adopted that priority, and so that's we really appreciate you doing that. I think other buildings do this with other churches, if I'm not mistaken. I think Eisenhower has a program similar to this, and I think it's probably more widespread in the district than just you folks, but you're a big piece of that. One question I'd have for you is, what do you think the unmet need is? You have 100 backpacks. How many could you give out if you needed to?
Many more than that. I mean, it's really I mean, it's challenging because you'd like to meet the needs of all the families, especially at JB, that are in need of a service or donations like this. But it's real easy for me to identify 50 families at JB who definitely benefit and appreciate what these guys have done.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it too. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Director Kluhl.
This reminds me of the Sparkle Effect out at Pleasant Valley High School, where some girls got together and they said, look, we want to do something for a service project, so we're going to take on this cheerleading thing with special needs girls. And those girls quickly found out that it was better to give than to receive. And so the same thing is happening now. I think Central has that same cheerleading program now. But what you all are doing is that same thing. I think the things that you've learned through this process of how good it feels to receive, to give, and granted that these children are receiving these things, and it's a great benefit for them, and certainly it promotes their ability to learn in school. But what you all are receiving in return is just inestimable, and I'm glad for the leadership. And this whole intergenerational thing, to me, is so cool to see you folks out there, the middle school kids, and you young students doing this, working together in our community. It's heartwarming. I'm very thankful for what you've all done to lead this process.
Director Crumwitty.
It's all been said, but I just want to thank you. I think it's just great to see schools helping other school populations in this district, and for community and churches to be involved. And thank you for volunteering to help our families in our schools in this district. So thank you very much.
Anybody else? Director DeFau.
And Director Crumwitty beat me to the punch, so to speak. But really, the People Uniting Neighborhoods and Churches is a great organization and doing a lot for the neighborhood in the Hilltop community, and very appreciative of that. And this is a great example of community school partnerships and all of your efforts as well. Just greatly appreciated.
Anybody else? Director Dickman.
Are you guys preparing to pass the torch on to anyone? I heard some of you were seniors, so I want to make sure that we're not going to, the program's not going to be fizzling out.
We're working on that.
All right.
We do have younger kids that come and pack the bags.
Anybody else? All right. I want to tell you that I'm kind of an old softy. And I thought about whether I should say this or not, but when you were telling the story, I got this chill that went down my spine, but then it kind of went through my whole body, and it was just one of those things that when you're talking about this, and it's so significant. There's something there, and it was something I couldn't control, of course, but I was very proud of all of you. It was just really, really significant, beyond everything you're doing, and all of our thanks and our praises. I wanted to let you know that even I get something out of what you're doing. So thank you very much, and thank you, all of you, for the presentation, for the work you're doing, and for the leadership. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to communications. Director Sherwood, would you please review our upcoming events?
Yes, sir. On December 8th, that's our meeting here. Well, you got more apparently. I've never done this before, so forgive me. That's all right. Okay. December 18th, Mid-City graduation, 7 p.m., Galvin Fine Arts Center, St. Ambrose. December 24th, closed the 25th through the 31st. January 1st, we're closed. January 5th, Committee of the Whole, 5:30 p.m., ASC Executive Boardroom. January 6th, Legislative Advocacy Committee, 3 p.m., ASC Executive Boardroom. January 7th, Policy Committee, 4 p.m., ASC Executive Boardroom. And January 12th, regular meeting, 6 p.m., ASC Jim Hester Boardroom.
Thank you very much. Next is open forum. We have no open forum requests this evening, but I wanted to remind everybody in our community that this is a time to give input at board meetings regarding school district issues or concerns. And we always look forward to your participation in open forum. We'll move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion?
Mr. President.
Director Crumwitty.
I move the consent agenda as presented by the administration.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of bills?
Mr. President.
Director Kluhl.
I move that the board approve the following resolution on the adoption of bills. The resolution is as follows. Resolved, all claims presented to the board having been duly certified as correct by the Secretary, reviewed by the administration and board members, and they are hereby audited and allowed as just claims and warrants drawn in the Treasury for the several amounts. Further resolved, the payment of claims and salaries be approved as presented for the period of November 20th, 2014 through December 3rd, 2014 with the following voided checks. Number 322823, payable to Advanced Business Systems in the amount of $5,079, and that was the wrong vendor. And additionally, check number 322988, payable to Teacher Director in the amount of $990.13. That too was the wrong vendor.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Move to the superintendent report.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Friday, I attended a ceremony at Central High School. They called Honor Their Fallen Warriors. This is the third year that they've had this ceremony. The first 2 years, it was actually the idea of Roy Schindler, and he actually, as an Army JROTC cadet, put on the ceremony for 2 years. He's now graduated, and so this year was their third year, and the ROTC cadets put it on. There are 44 Central High students who have perished while serving in the armed forces, so each year they do that ceremony. It was well attended by members of the community. On Saturday, we had our first Saturday Academy for the Greater Achievement Plan, the GAP. They held it at the Putnam Museum, and they actually had to hold 2 sessions, a morning and an afternoon session. The idea was the families would go through the museum, and then they attended a showing in the theater. We had 95 of our GAP students and 315 family members for a total of the total which for the entire day. So we have 3 Saturday Academies. The next one probably is going to be at the library. And again, the academies are just features daily at the schools. We have each of the GAP students is being serviced by the school. They're working at home with their families, and also we have members of the community helping them out. This week I have the second meeting of what I'm calling a Blue Ribbon Think Tank for Technology. I have some experts in technology from both within the district and without, and we're only having 2 meetings, and the idea, I'm trying to come up with some ideas to help the board to actually form a pretty solid vision for technology so that we can actually say, here's the way we want to look in 5 years, and then start some planning with our dollars and our funding. I'm also going to have a Blue Ribbon Think Tank of students, because they're the ones who will be serving, and they're probably far in advance, and they want to kind of drag us along. So once that's done, I'll work with the agenda committee and really decide how best to have the discussion with the board. And that's my report.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move to other items requiring action. May I have a motion regarding approval of audit?
Mr. President,
Director Dickman.
I move the administration's recommendation that the board approve the audit report prepared by and presented by Eddie Bailey, CPA, and business advisors for the 2013-14 audit of the district.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. President?
Director Sherwood.
I wasn't here, so this is all hearsay, so I want you to correct me if I'm incorrect. I understand that part of the presentation was that there was a looming deficit that we had to face that were a transference of IPERS accounting to us that we were going to be responsible for paying back to the state. Is that correct?
There was a discussion about that. However, it wasn't part of the audit.
It was not.
Right.
All right, I'll talk about it later then. Thank you.
Marcia, that is correct, right? It was a comment that he was making later on, but it wasn't part of this audit that we're approving tonight, is it?
That's correct. He was talking about an upcoming standard that we're going to adhere to for next year.
All right.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Any additional discussion? All right, we'll call for the vote. Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of modified allowable growth for dropout prevention application?
Mr. President,
Director DeFow.
I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation and approve the modified allowable growth for dropout prevention application for the 2015-16 school year.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Dickman.
This is a related note. Have we ever I know that this is going to the school budget review committee. Have we ever gone to them to ask about the fees that Davenport misses out on because of our large free and reduced population, in giving us increased allowable growth because of the funding that we do not receive due to our reduced free and reduced lunch population?
We have not in the past, and I believe by the definition of what we can go to the school budget review committee for, that would not qualify because it's not a unique and usual circumstance for the district.
Okay, even though we have a significantly larger population than most other...
Yeah, that wouldn't qualify by the definition.
All right, well, since we're talking about it anyway, I thought I'd ask. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, we'll call for the vote. Director DeFow?
Yes.
Director Sherwood?
Yes.
Director Dickman? Yes. Director Kluhl?
Yes.
Director Crumwitty?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of the early retirement option?
Mr. President,
Director Kluhl.
I move that the board approve the early retirement incentive plan, which will be immediately offered to Davenport Community School District employees.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? If there isn't, Director Dickman.
Well, I'm kind of surprised there's not any other discussion. I do feel that the plan that was proposed by the DEA was reasonable, and we keep on considering different issues that we need to look at for our budgetary crisis that's coming up, and unless the state legislature starts acting responsibly, we need to make some tough choices here sooner or later. We can't keep on saying, oh, well, we're not going to do this. Oh, well, we're not going to do that. We need to do something, and unless we want to start making big across-the-board cuts, this is the kind of thing that we should be looking at. I personally, I don't think it's perfect, but I do prefer the plan that was put forth by the DEA. So if that is proposed as an amendment, I would be supporting that.
Are you it sounded like you...
I will propose amending the motion. Let's see. I move that the board approve the early retirement plan that was proposed by the DEA.
So, if I understand your amendment, you're amending the original motion, and it would be changed to accept the DEA's recommendation. Is that, and I'm trying to think whether there's anything there that is conflicting with itself. Can you delineate what you're talking? There's a lot involved there. The 20-year, 25-year, 30-year, the date of submission, the percent FTEs. You're saying the whole thing, right?
Correct.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion to amend?
Second.
Okay, let me keep track of this just a minute. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to amend the motion, and the motion would be substantially to approve the early retirement incentive plan as recommended or offered by the DEA. Does that capture what you're trying to do? Okay, so is there any discussion?
Mr. President?
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, I'm not going to support this motion because my feeling is that right now we're kind of in a crunch, and if I saw that, I thought this was going to bring us more financial benefit, then I guess I would support it. I think that, and you know this well, I think teachers are underpaid. All of our employees are undercompensated as far as I'm concerned. And so if there's some way to give teachers additional benefits, I'd love to do that, but I don't think this is the place to do that. I think the bargaining table is the place to do that, and I think that, and I would like to see this, an ongoing district and DEA committee that looks at these issues so that we don't have separate proposals coming forward. We have one unified proposal coming forward from one of our key partners in these things. I also think that there's some place out there, there's a discussion for compensated unused sick leave, compensated, that can encourage folks not to use that sick leave, and that we can do that. A lot of folks out in the industry do that, and successfully may cut down on our cost of lots of things. But those are the kind of conversations we ought to be having ongoing with the DEA as a full partner in these things. But for this particular issue, because I think the gains in this are short-term. I think that we're going to regrow these salaries over a period of time. So this is just temporary fix in the first place, and so I can't support putting additional money out there. I don't think it's going to get us any benefit toward this budget issue.
Director DeFau.
And I would add that based upon the information we received from legal counsel, we would not only have to come to terms with the DEA, but also with our other 5 bargaining groups before we were able to offer an early retirement incentive this year. Given that the application deadline would be February 1st, I don't see how that's tenable, given that we are already sitting at December 8th. And I would further reiterate, as I said at the last meeting, that I don't believe we should be balancing the budget on the backs of our employees and losing veteran teachers. While it may be an economic necessity, is not a win-win in the classroom.
Other discussion? Director Kluhl.
I do appreciate the DEA coming forward with their proposal. I think that the more information that we have, the better decision that we make. In this case, I believe that, as Director DeFau said, it's a bit late in the process to think that we could negotiate with all the bargaining units to come up with a negotiated solution. I'm also concerned about the continued loss through our early retirement program of teachers who have a great deal of time and talent and expertise in the areas that they've been in. Back in 2012, I requested a breakout of the age of our teachers, and it's back in 2012 it was heavily skewed 49 and below, and now it's not the age issue that we're talking about here, it's the number of years of service, but you have to say that that does have a parallel with the age. And so my concern then is that the impact to education, granted we're trying to save money, I can see that we would have more teachers coming into this, there'd be a greater onrush in the initial year, but I'm concerned about the out years and the rather careful way that administration is approaching how we do the early retirement program. Not that it might not be a consideration in future years, because as DEA pointed out, there is a discrepancy between us and the other urban 8 districts in terms of the number of years of service that we require. So I would like to see this in future discussion.
Additional discussion, Director Crumwitty.
I do appreciate the DEA bringing this forward. However, I do agree that there's too many uncertainties as to moving ahead with this recommendation right now. Also, the timing factor and dealing with the other bargaining units. This is going to take some time, and I would encourage more conversation in the future and the impacts that it would have on our budget in the future. So I would not support this amendment at this time.
Anybody else? All right, we'll take a vote on the amendment. So the amendment is to accept the recommendation that the board approve the early retirement incentive plan as offered by the DEA. And everybody has a copy of that, right? Okay. Which would be immediately offered to Davenport Community School District employees. Call for the vote. This is only on the amendment, not the original motion. Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
No.
Director DeFow.
No.
Director Kluhl.
No.
Director Crumwitty.
No.
Director Snyder.
No.
And my vote is no. Motion fails. We're back to the original motion, which is to approve the administration recommendation for the early retirement incentive plan, which will be immediately offered to the Davenport Community School District employees. Is there additional discussion on this motion? All right. Oh, Director Snyder.
I guess I just wanted to verify also that this is being extended to all district employees and not just certified.
Marcia, that is true, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, it is.
Any other discussion? All right, we'll call for the vote. Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
No.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of Central High School Harrison Parking Lot and Brady Campus Tennis Courts project?
Mr. President.
Director Crumwitty.
I move the administration's recommendation that the board approve the lowest responsive bid from Tricon Construction for $1,244,000 for the Central High School Harrison Street Parking and Brady Campus Tennis Court project.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Snyder.
Mike, this is, as we had discussed last, this is all of the tennis courts there across from Central, correct?
Yes, all of the tennis courts on Harrison Street would be replaced with parking and 8 new courts built at the Brady Street campus.
Okay.
Additional discussion. Director Dickman.
I will be, again, symbolically voting no because I think there is an equity issue here. If we were spending approximately $4,000 a student on facilities for students at any other grade, it would be ridiculous or considered ridiculous by someone more than me. I think that we do need to look at equity of our capital fund dollars, and I don't think that $4,000 a student on sporting use is an appropriate way to be spending that.
Additional discussion. I'm going to call on the student board members. I should have recognized you earlier. Do you have any thoughts on this particular subject? Luke?
I would like to have tennis courts that we could use. I mean, the cost is a lot, but our pool and auditorium are really old, and so I mean we've decided to fix that, but then we don't have parking. So I guess I just see that the spending, it is a lot, but I see that it's justified.
Any other student board members? Cindy?
I've actually played on the tennis courts, and I know a few of us have actually tripped and fallen. So it's something that needs to be repaired, if not, completely redone.
Any other student board members? All right. Back to any board members. Director Snyder.
I completely respect Director Dickman's opinions in that we'd like to keep dollars as close to the classroom as we can, but we have one other bigger issue, and that's Iowa's open enrollment. Maybe athletics isn't important to one of us as a board member or to one of us as a public, but it's important to a lot of kids that attend these schools. The athletics are. And when we start cutting back on athletics or reducing what's allowed at certain schools, then we risk losing more kids to surrounding districts. And every kid that leaves our district takes money with them. So every child that leaves and goes to another district for tennis or for another program that we start cutting back on, then that's more dollars that we have to reduce our budget. We have to keep in mind that, it is not a lot of kids on a tennis team, but there are a lot of people that do use those tennis courts, and it is important to maintain that at all of our schools.
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, I just completely lost my train of thought. I apologize. Oh, yeah, I know, Mike. What's the completion time of getting these done out at Brady Street?
I don't think we'll have the tennis courts done for the tennis season. I've already talked with Principal McKissick and Athletic Director about alternate arrangements for this season.
This would seem like a fairly simple thing to get done compared to your bigger projects. Why the delay?
Just the delay in getting started, the weather, and so forth. We're going to attempt to get them done, but given the problems we had with adhesion of the surface at North, I didn't want to risk doing that surface treatment in less than ideal weather conditions. And so if we had good weather conditions, we would go ahead, but if it's not ideal, we wouldn't want to risk having the same problems.
I appreciate that. And we're extending this from 6 courts to 8, is that correct?
Correct.
And so they'll be able to hold tournaments there, which they can't do now, as I understand it.
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
I think that's correct, based on this testimony we've had before the board in the past. And I guess that's it. Thank you, Mike.
Director DeFau.
I trust this is a different vendor than the one that put in the North tennis courts?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And I would reiterate Director Snyder's comments. There's there's a lot of different things that impact equity, and among those is equitable programming. And we do see students frequently transfer in district as well as out of district because they believe that our programming is inequitable. And I think that we need to ensure that we do what we can to limit that. That being said, I will be voting in accordance with my previous statements and will be voting against the project because I don't believe that we have taken into consideration all possible options that we could.
Additional discussion. Director Dickman?
Oh, sorry. Just to clarify, it's not the parking that I'm opposed to. It's the remaking of the tennis courts. As to the open enrollment and the in-district transferring, we are trying to maintain 3 state-of-the-art high schools, and I fully support that idea if we had the money for it. But when we're looking at cutting the block schedule from the general fund, and instead of using our capital fund dollars to try to come up with ways so that our general fund isn't as stretched as it is, we're building tennis courts, and the majority of our open enrollment that we lost this year was actually grade schoolers, kindergarten and first grade, and maybe they're leaving because they hear the rumor mill about the facilities in our grade school that are inadequate and overfilled. So I think if we're really looking at the open enrollment issue, which is an issue for us losing students, we can't just be spending all of our capital fund dollars trying to win over a select number of high schoolers. We also have to keep in mind that grade school and middle school parents can open enroll out of the district as well.
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, and it's a very good point brought up how we might use capital dollars to relieve some of the pressure on the general fund. And you and I have talked about this in the past. And would you share with the board a little bit about what you've done as far as reallocating positions and your efforts to cut energy and usage and all those things that do impact directly the general fund?
Now, excuse me, Director Sherwood, I want to make sure that the discussion is pertinent to the agenda item. I can't quite figure out how to.
Give me a minute, I'll figure it out.
So if you can come back later and figure it out, that'd be
fine.
great. Okay,
right.
Thank you. Any additional discussion, Director DeFau?
I'll take this opportunity to say that it's not just out-of-district transfer, but also in-district transfer that has a real impact on our high schools, in that as high schools lose enrollment, they lose staffing, and they lose dollars associated with that staffing. They also lose the opportunity to offer course sections. And there are some sports in this district where a full 70% of the students that are participating in an athletic program do not participate in their home school. They open transfer from another high school. It's a significant problem, and one that I think that we need to do what we can to limit.
Additional discussion. Director Kluhl.
Well, and I always think having diverse opinions is great. It's one of the great things about being on this board is every board member feels their need to make sure that the board as a whole shares their own thinking on the issues. On this one, in addition to the comments that have been made, one of the issues that I think is very important, years ago, the board was trying to decide how do we make sure that we treat all of our schools equitably. So we had this rather large matrix put together, administration put it together in terms, and it was called essential functions. And one of the things that we were trying to do in that is to make sure that all of our schools were treated equitably. And so I see this as an equity issue for Central. I mean, they do need to have some equity with the other schools. I think that while I believe that someday, mark me on this, we will have our athletic programs run by clubs outside of schools like Europe does. At the present time, it ain't that way. So it is what it is, and I believe that we need to treat Central equitably with our other high schools.
Director Sherwood.
One final point I'd make is that these high schools are not all created equal, period. I mean, some are landlocked in urban high schools. Central High School is our most urban high school and most landlocked as far as our ability to expand. These other places have lots of room you can do things on. So the cost of providing some of these programs for that urban high school is going to be more difficult, more expensive than it is for some of these high schools that I would call almost suburban in their nature. So you know, land makes a difference, and we don't have it at Central, and so it becomes more difficult and pricier to bring equity to that building. And we need to recognize that when we say equity, it isn't always about everything being exactly the same. It's about what is also fair.
Anybody else? There are things I want to say, but I'm not sure that I can make them pertinent to this particular discussion either. So I won't make those comments. Any other discussion? All right, if not, we'll call for the vote. Make sure where I am. Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
No.
Director DeFau.
No.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. May I have a motion regarding approval of Wood Intermediate Gym HVAC and music renovation project?
Mr. President,
Director DeFau.
I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation and approve the lowest responsive bid of Centennial Contractors of the Quad Cities, Inc., B&B Masonry, Bevins Steel Company, and Western Steel Company in the amount of $984,404 for the Wood Intermediate Gym, HVAC, and music renovations project.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director DeFau.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding the approval of Mid-City Physical Activities Center Addition project?
Mr. President.
Director Sherwood.
I move that the board accept the administration recommendation to approve the award of bids to the lowest responsive bidders as indicated in the bid tabulation for a total of $2 billion. I think I'm the federal government. $2,670,066.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I have to ask, how does this fit into the long-range plan? What does it impact by us doing all this?
These projects are all projects that had previously been scheduled in the prior, current, and next fiscal years in the long-range plan, and so they don't affect any of the other projects that had been previously scheduled. And when we bring the update to you early next year to consider for the long-range plan, these will not have displaced any that had been originally in the plan. These were things that you had been planning on doing.
Is there any other discussion? Director Sherwood.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a concern. You're adding quite a bit more square footage of impermeable surface there with this building there being there. The way you have the drainage set up on that current site currently, it drains to that field in the back to a catch basin you have there. In my opinion, that field probably should have been looked at as a potential athletic site for outdoor activities. Right now, I think that catch basin makes that very difficult to achieve. Are there any plans to alter your drainage system and other retention features on that site?
Yes, there's additional drainage retention facility that is north and west of that existing outlet. There will be some modifications to that, and the land further to the south and east, there's still a large part of that parcel remaining. It's something of a grade there, but should you want to do some additional development there for athletics or other things in the future, there's still a good bit of land unaffected by the retention system that will be put in.
Now that system seems to be kind of almost middle of that whole parcel as far as it's there. Any chance of getting that moved so it's at one side or another so that we potentially, I think at some point this district's going to want to, if we retain that site, the district's going to want to develop that. And I know there's some grading involved and probably a retaining wall of some kind would have to be built, but that's still plenty of room for outdoor rec for those kids. And if the numbers grow there, if we allow it to grow slightly, it doesn't want to grow a lot, but slightly, that would be a critical feature. Across the street at Kimberly Center, all we had was blacktop. And by the way, I am an advocate still of tearing a lot of that blacktop up and turning that into green space. There's no reason we couldn't do that. Might be a fun thing to get out the board out there with picks and tear that asphalt up. But I would like some reconsideration about how that drainage system sited on that thing. Thanks.
Director DeFau.
I'm going to take an attempt at Director Johansson's question again. The last time the local option sales tax was approved was approximately 4 years ago. At that time, Mid-City High was not part of the plan. We had no concept of doing that except for a vague, very long-term, maybe we'll have a fourth high school. So if it didn't exist then, it's certainly replacing something now, and that, I think, is the larger question.
We had money set aside for Kimberly Center, so what we did was take the money that we were going to spend, and again, I'm not sure what the vision was, and it was probably out about 3 or 4 years, and moved it up. That's what we used to buy Mid-City and now to put in this center. So it wasn't called Mid-City, but it was a Kimberly Center upgrade. I think someone had visualized, as you say, the fourth high school.
I'd be very interested in knowing what that dollar amount was, because I'm fairly confident it wasn't in the range of what we're doing now, and I fully support Mid-City High. I don't want anyone to think I don't, but I do think that as a board, knowing that we have limited resources and more needs than we have money, that we need to be very judicious, and as we're looking at possible repurposing of buildings and other things, that we cannot make assumptions that what existed on that plan 4 years ago is what we need to do today, and that it's in the best interest of our students. And I think that's why some of us are advocating that not just the dust be shaken off and some numbers updated in that project, but that we have some very real conversations about what this board's priorities are.
Additional discussion. And I agree with what Director DeFau was just talking about it, and of course she articulated my thoughts a lot better than I could have. But that's the area of my concern, is probably the money, and as I think about all of our projects, and I know we'll have a discussion on our long-range plan in a few months. And I think at that point we'll get into the discussion on priorities and philosophies and a lot of those kinds of things. What's the sense of urgency in approving this?
The work is underway. Some of the bid packages have been approved, and so the sense of urgency is that the way this project is structured, the work is currently underway on the foundations and site work and so forth, and so these bid packages are the steel coming up out of the ground, and next month I believe you'll get the final bid package.
Is this the end of the long-range planning dollars that would be put into that facility for a while?
To the best of my understanding, it would be.
Okay, and can you tell me how much we've spent already on that? Rough numbers.
Oh, gosh, I want to say between 7 and 8 million.
So that's total. That was the acquisition and the reconstruction
The
and
yes.
everything. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Director Sherwood.
I don't think that figure includes the acquisition. I think you're closer to 10 with the acquisition and the things that went on before Mike got here. That's my guess.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? All right, we'll call for the vote. Director Sherwood.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFow.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. I have a motion regarding approval of Fillmore Elementary Classroom and Multi-Purpose Addition.
Mr. President,
Director Dickman.
I move the administration's recommendation that the board approve the lowest responsive bid of $997,956 from Tiber Construction, B&B Masonry, Bevan Steel Company, and Western Steel for the Fillmore Elementary Classroom and Multi-Purpose Addition project.
Okay, I just want to clarify the number. I think is $997,956.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Crumwoody.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. I'm really quite concerned that this this is being brought to us tonight to vote on, and my concern is that we've had some recent discussion about the Fillmore situation related to preschool and the lack of preschool space at Fillmore School. And as a member of the Poverty Committee, and we have a preschool subgroup, we also talked about perhaps looking at more preschools in our neighborhood schools. Fillmore's an excellent example of that situation where there's a high need and we don't have space for preschool. So we have two items on the agenda tonight to vote on this, and then we have a discussion item about preschool classes in traditional school settings. And that concerns me that we're voting on this and possibly approving this, and then are we going to turn around and perhaps add more additions to Fillmore School if we decide we want additional preschool space? So I'm concerned about that, and I don't know what the sense of urgency is for this right now to approve this addition, or can this wait until we have more discussion about preschools in neighborhood schools? Because just recently we talked about Central High School, and we're doing now more things at Central High School, and we've been told it's cheaper if we do all of this at once rather than doing separate projects. And I'd certainly be opposed to doing another separate project on Fillmore. So I'm wondering what the sense of urgency is, and can we have the discussion first about preschool in traditional school settings before we move ahead with the Fillmore project?
You've asked a couple things. I'm going to ask the superintendent to talk about the sense of urgency. The other part, I've been thinking about how to address your request to change the order and take the vote later. And I think that the appropriate motion would be to table the motion, and then it would be brought up later in the meeting. But I'd like to have the superintendent address the senses of urgency and why this was brought up.
Mr. Maloney and I have had this conversation. In fact, I said that that's exactly what would come up, almost word for word. And I said it'd probably be you who said it, so I wasn't too far off. Mike, talk about why we need to do this now to get this moving And then how difficult would it be if the board at a later date, tonight's just a philosophical discussion, they'd have to actually vote, yes, we want a preschool. So talk about how that timing would work.
These bid packages are part of the scope of work that was originally approved for the project. That was the addition of the multipurpose room, the new dining hall and kitchen, and the renovations of the existing classrooms to bring them up to current district standards, and that would require a 6 classroom addition. And it did not include consideration of adding pre-K. Of course, this, similar to the other 2 projects, is been bid in multiple phases. The site work and foundations have already been awarded, and this again is steel and other things coming up out of the ground. Since the conversation started a couple of months ago about pre-K at Fillmore, we have had some conversations with the principal and the architect about 2 ways to address that problem should you decide to want to have pre-K facilities there. One would be to change the nature of the interior renovations already planned in order to provide a space for pre-K. Principal Asse and architect Greg Gowie have done some work on how that could be accommodated. The other would be to do a physical addition to actually make the building larger by adding an additional classroom. The urgency here is, again, these awards are part of work already underway that was the original scope of work you approved some months ago. So that has been in progress. Should you decide to add pre-K and do that next month, for example, and direct us to solve that, we would bring back to you one of 2 solutions, either an addition or modification of the interior renovations currently planned. So we know there are 2 ways that could be done. It would be late, but we think it's still enough time that if you decided next month, for example, that you wanted to add pre-K, that we would be able to do that and get it in, but it would occur as a change order to the contractor, and our architect would prepare the appropriate documents, and we'd be able to execute that, we think, still by August.
Does that address your questions?
So, yes, I think so. So if we approve this tonight, we can still turn around and have a change order next month if we, as a board, decide that we want a preschool, a room for preschool at Fillmore. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We started thinking about how to do that in response to your questions when this first was brought to our attention. We went forward with the project that you had already approved, but we started thinking about, well, how could we solve that problem should you decide you want to do that?
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Director Sherwood.
Would there make any sense to do some just preliminary things with what you're doing already, like stubbing out utilities and so forth in anticipation there might be an addition that would save us some dough later on?
We would be, based on your conversation later, unless you change the order, based on your conversation later, we would respond to that and make whatever preparations we could absent your action.
What we wouldn't want to see is we want to see us having to go back and tear into newly constructed, stuff in order to.
Yes, we can avoid that.
Yeah, okay, that'd be my concern.
We can avoid that.
And the second piece, I don't know if this ties into this conversation, but what we're talking about is kind of revisiting some of the long-range plan, and we've had that discussion a little bit. But I'm also concerned that we don't put a lot of dollars into buildings that might be repurposed, and that's a nice euphemism. I'm not sure how often you can repurpose a building, but I don't want to put a lot of dough into a building that may not exist as a school building in the near term. So the sooner we identify the potential buildings that might be repurposed, without panicking everybody on the planet, but doing that and avoiding outlays that later on look ridiculous because we just built additions to a building we closed. It doesn't make any sense to me either. So.
Director DeFau.
following that line somewhat, it's my understanding when we first talked about this project that part of the reason for the expansion was to accommodate the growing population in the west end of Davenport, and that the Truman addition and the Fillmore addition would in turn allow us to take some pressure off of Harrison, so that I do think there is some critical need here in terms of trying to accommodate that growth and to, you know, get buildings lower than 95% capacity rate.
Any other discussion? Director Kluhl.
Mike, in a possible change order, ostensibly the contractor is still on site, so there's not a considerable addition of expense involved.
Because this is a construction manager advisor method of project delivery, it actually makes it easier to execute a change order and know we've got competitive pricing and things of that nature.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Well, I want to say a couple things. You know, in general, I support the idea. And the idea was, I don't even know exactly where it came from, but it was somewhat organic, I think, in the way that it developed and grew. I am concerned about spending $1 million on something that we haven't discussed much. And I don't think that $1 million was in the long-range plan, right?
I'm confused about what $1 million you're referring to.
The $997,956.
Yes, this is for the multipurpose building and the classroom addition at Fillmore. This is completely unrelated to anything for pre-K.
Oh, I misunderstood that. I thought that there was another indication, because I thought that was a much larger original program.
Yes, the budget was $7,335,000.
Right.
And this is one part of it.
Okay, but it is not part of the pre-K. It is not
No.
that additional room. Okay. All right. Director Sherwood.
I noticed a lot of chatter among our student board members. I think maybe they want to jump in on this thing.
Anybody? Student board members? Must be chattering about something else. Okay, so any other discussion? We'll call for the vote then. Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
Director DeFau.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Move to discussion items, preschool classes in traditional schools. Superintendent Tate, do you want to open that up?
Not really. I do. Tammy Conrad, will you come up? And we have Bill Schneiden. They've been both thinking this through. I know a couple of board members have talked about it, so I'd prefer the board members kind of talk about what your vision is, your philosophy, what your hope is, and I asked Tommy and Bill both to do some thinking, Tammy and Bill to do some thinking about it, and we'll just have a good discussion.
Great, thank you. Tammy?
This all came out of, it grew from our retreat that we had for early childhood back in October. And we had a great group of people there together brainstorming what preschool will look like in the future here with Davenport Schools. And one of the ideas that was mentioned was having the preschools located in the neighborhood elementary buildings. I can tell you right now that last year our villages served 315 of the 1,230 kindergartners that are in our schools today. So we only touched about 25% of those little ones. As we talk about the achievement gap and our poverty group, this is definitely an area that could benefit our 4-year-olds and our kindergartners. and beyond. So we talk about Fillmore, and up until this school year, Fillmore did have a Head Start program there, but it has then been moved to the Goose Creek Community Center. They will be able to serve about 24-year-olds next year. We're looking at, right now, that would be serving still only half of those students that go to Fillmore, based on current numbers that we have. So I guess the discussion, questions, if you have any questions as to where we came up with these ideas or brainstorms, please feel free to answer. Or ask, excuse me.
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, so half of the kids would be served at Goose Creek, and half will not be served. If we built classrooms at Fillmore for preschool, what guarantees could you give us that you would fill those classrooms, that additional slots would actually be used?
Well, I can't guarantee anything.
Gotcha.
But this currently, right now, we are in the process of getting together a group of names of 4-year-old students that are not being served out there in the Fillmore area to start a mini program second semester where we would possibly run from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. in an existing classroom. And we already have a list of approximately 25 names.
And a question I've had, and I'm a big fan, as far as I can tell, of diversifying this around the district, moving these places where people are rather than having them all try to come to our 2 campuses. But the downside to that, it seems to me, is the high mobility of our families. And when they move from Fillmore preschool, now they're in a different area. Transportation becomes more problematic for them unless there's a preschool where they've moved to, and then they've got to deal with reorienting the kid to a new staff and you know, that whole thing. That seems to be a pretty big downside. Do you see that as a downside?
With the mobility, it could be. We would hope that the area where the students are focusing on, that Fillmore, Goose Creek area, that we'd be able to maintain the students that are there and provide them with what they need. As I really can't answer any further.
Right.
Bill,
We have some of our schools that have 60
there.
or 70% that move. So I'm just wondering how that affects these kids.
I think the only reason Fillmore is the spot we're talking about right now is because out of this retreat, we immediately went to where are we doing all this remodeling. And, of course, Truman, which was just remodeled, included a preschool. And they were serving 3 sections of 4-year-olds there, 3 sections in the course of a day. So then the conversation was like, how do we better reach the kids? And there must be quite an attraction to go to your neighborhood school. So that's when the conversation said, well, the next thing on the docket is Fillmore. We better get on board there if there's an interest in doing this before we get too far down the road. So I think the idea came out of this retreat was these 4-year-olds that we would serve would be in their home schools, attached to their principal, their secretaries, their brothers and sisters go to school there, and in some cases they could walk to and from school. Would that reach more than 300 of the 1,200 right now without affecting the villages? The big thing was we didn't want to have a negative impact on the villages, and we just feel like there's a lot of 4-year-olds out there that we could provide preschooling for, and this would be a way to get started. So to answer your question, Bill, I don't know what the next school would be that's going to be affected, because it's like, where's the next major remodel project coming that you'd want to make sure you were including this kind of conversation. Most of the principals we've talked with are interested in preschool. They just don't have the space. And if the space could become available, they see it as a good idea. That's why Tammy's talking about this 3 to 5. We're looking at 2 buildings where we might try to start second semester, seeing if we can get a group of 4-year-olds to come in from 3 to 5 when the kindergarten rooms are available and use these spaces.
Now, and I give you that this is going to take time and probably a revision of the long-term plan to accommodate this if this is what we want to do. You're already at J.B. Young. You're having kids meet there, then are transported to preschool and other slots, the kids that are associated with that building. Have you talked about Jefferson? Right?
It's at Jefferson, yes.
I'm sorry, I
yes.
apologize.
No,
but have we had any discussions about expanding that as a temporary means of bringing services to the local schools?
As far as utilizing the facilities method. That method, yeah. We have discussed that we have discussed that. In fact, we had discussed, you know, possibly busing some from that Monroe area over to Lincoln, but we believe that there would be enough there at Monroe to start this program here second semester.
Right, but given our lack of facilities, we could make this happen sooner by being able to do that kind of thing, at least making those schools home schools, right? Yeah. Okay.
Director DeFile.
And while I appreciate the value of preschool programming and can see the benefit of in-building preschool, and in fact, I think when I first was on the board, we had many more preschool programs offered in the elementary schools as opposed to what we do now. I'm very reluctant to make a decision in haste based upon the sheer fact that a building's being remodeled. You know, I think, again, this is a larger conversation about what are our goals, where are we philosophically. This is not a budget neutral decision. There will be ongoing implications to the general fund. And I think that we really need to have the conversation in the larger context of what our plans are, or your plans are, in the next, you know, 2 to 5 years. There are some bigger questions to be answered and some accountability to the community that may not understand why we're incurring additional costs for preschool programming when we're saying we have to cut programming at the K through 12 buildings. So again, I can't support making the decision just because. There has to be a better reason than that. I'm fully willing to support preschool programming. I understand the benefits of it. But don't ask me to make a decision in a month when there are these much larger looming questions that we haven't answered.
Director Crumwoody.
In sitting in on the Poverty Committee and sitting in on the Early Child Committee, I think that I've been concerned about this issue for a long time, but I am more and more concerned. When you look at our high poverty in this community and in our school district, we are serving, what did Kendall say, and you said it tonight too, about 25%. And we as a board say we're very, very concerned about the achievement gap in this district. If we're concerned, we can't sit around for 2 or 5 years to make these decisions. We have to start moving on these decisions. If our priorities, if we're really saying our priorities are poverty, then we need to be doing something about it and not delaying some of these things. So what we talked about in the Early Childhood Committee was looking at those, especially those high poverty schools, the schools that are at risk, and take a look at the schools that are most at risk, and do they even offer preschool in those schools? Many of them, no, they don't. And so our achievement gap is going to continue to get wider and wider unless we as a board start doing something about it, because we're not now. We're offering preschool in centers, and then take a look at the population that we're serving in our centers and look at the population that we're not serving. And what we've been told by the administrators in the district and early childhood committees is there's a whole bunch of kiddos out there that need to be in preschool, and we're not getting them there, and they don't have the transportation to get there. So what's the next best thing to do? We need to be taking a look at our neighborhood schools to work out some ways. Truman, who Bill mentioned, they came up with a very unique way of serving, what do they serve, 36? They have 3 sections of
51 of 60.
51
51 of the 60 spots.
They're serving almost their entire kindergarten population. You go to Fillmore, nothing right now. So, yes, we can't sit around and wait. We need to start moving and acting on these things. And so we're doing something with this building right now. Why wait? Why not address that issue at Fillmore? We're trying to address the issue at Monroe in kind of a unique way, but there's another population that's not being served. So I think we need to move.
Director Defa.
Just to clarify, not suggesting a two-year delay in a decision, asking for a vision of where this board wants to be in the next 2 to 5 years, and then make these decisions in that context. So, as I said, I support preschool. I support the concept of preschool programming and you know, offering those services to our students. I understand it's a poverty issue. I would welcome that information that was shared in the Poverty Committee. We've talked about having a presentation by the committee so as to better, you know, inform the board. But I don't think it's a good idea to make decisions in a vacuum.
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, I love coming down on both sides of an issue. It's good training for higher office, I think. I agree with Ken 100%, and I agree with Nikki 100%. So this is
bravo.
The issue I talk to is I go around the district and visit schools. I always stop in the kindergarten classrooms, and one question I ask every teacher: what difference does it make to have a kid coming into your room that had our preschool versus not having the preschool? And I've never had a teacher not say that it wasn't dramatic. The difference is dramatic in the preparation of those children coming in. If we're researchers, we might attribute that to lots of things besides the preschool. It might be parental interest, lots of things. But the fact is, I think these preschools make an enormous difference for the preparation of the kids. And so every time we delay providing our best preschool services to the maximum number of kids, we're hurting kids. We're holding some kids' future in our hands, and we're falling down on the job when we don't supply these services that we know work. So that gives us an urgency that we have to deal with. On the flip side of that, there has to be planning. There has to be thoughtful moving forward, because at some point, as it was pointed out with this board, we went to the village system. We moved away from the neighborhood schools and concentrated people. And if that was a mistake, then it might have been a mistake out of rash action. So we can't make rash actions and hope to have a good long-term outcome. So we have to find a way to moderate both of these things, to present both of these things. But I think saying that this is urgent and that we need to, as a board, address these things thoughtfully in the very near term would be a reasonable thing for us to do.
Any additional discussion? Director Dickman.
First, Luke, did you have a question? I saw you raised your hand at one point.
It was kind of answered. I was just wondering, with those 800 kids that aren't going to preschool, why are they not? Like, is it cost, or is it location, or lack of space? Because it seems like those would be questions that need to be answered to decide whether putting preschools in the elementary schools would be effective.
It's a very good question. I would say part of it, if I may answer, part of it is access, transportation. Those are probably two of the biggest issues right there. And by looking at the neighborhood schools, we would hope to be able to do both things, provide that access for them, and also take the ease of the transportation issue off the parents' plate. So,
two other things. One is childcare, because the parents work and we give a half-day session. So that gives the parent an issue of either before, the morning or the afternoon for childcare. And the other is some people just don't believe that children should be in school that young. And we haven't educated enough to realize that we need them at 4 at least some of the time. And families just don't have that experience that may not be in their culture. So we really are fighting in a lot of cases people understanding that kindergarten is not making stuff and putting and doing coloring anymore. Kindergarten is writing, reading, and knowing your numbers and your letters, and that's got to start at preschool. That's where we teach them how to sit and be independent and things of that nature. So that's a great question, and it's all those things that we're seeing that we're trying to overcome.
Thank you.
Director Snyder.
Yeah, actually, I want to go back to the number you threw out and on Luke's as well. And you said that it's not necessarily 800 kids that are not in preschool, correct? It's 800 that of the 1,200 that are not being serviced by the Children's
By
Villages?
the Children's Villages, yes.
So we don't...
The quality that we provide, yes.
Okay, so we don't know if they're attending private preschools. We don't know if you had it in their driveway, they still wouldn't have any ambition to go. There's a lot of unknown factors, correct?
There are some other ones. I mean, we take a look at that 1,230. We know that 315 of them were served at the villages. We also have our partner sites that are providing some type of preschool to them, and that including Head Start, the Y, and some of the non-public schools. So there are some more that are receiving, but they're just not receiving it from us. But we'd still be looking at almost 400 students that aren't getting any type of service.
I mean, but we know that for a fact. I mean, not private preschools, or we just know we're not servicing them.
We know we're not servicing them, and they're not receiving the curriculum that is being taught through the villages and our partner sites.
Have we reached out to the families, say, of the children that we know that we haven't serviced, to, I mean, flat out ask them why? I mean, here we're guessing, and we know for a fact transportation's a huge issue, especially in our high poverty areas. It very well could be employment. It could be daycare doesn't take them to preschool. I mean, there's a lot of factors come to play here.
We have reached out to home providers that we know of. Diana Salins, who works with the Children's Villages, has some connections there with home providers, and it's hard to get your foot in that door with them because some of them may be non-licensed, and they're not sure who they're letting in their door. But we have tried to reach out to them. As far as the ones that are not receiving, we don't know who they are. We're unable to identify some of those. That's why I believe reaching out to our Title I buildings, such as Fillmore, Monroe, Truman, Madison, we have the family involvement liaisons that are there. And I've actually had conversations with Dr. Owa to see if they would be able to identify some of those kids that are out that we don't know of, and they are working on that. So.
Okay, you kind of hit my next question right on the head with that it's kind of hard to target somebody when you don't know who or where they are. Mm-hmm. So that makes it even harder to put emphasis on certain buildings, which we can only assume the precedence would be with our higher poverty schools. But again, we're assuming, so.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Director Dickman.
Can you talk about the funding streams? I know that at the Children's Village, they have braided together a lot of things, and then I'm assuming there's similar models for the in-school pre-K classrooms.
As far as the funding sources for example, for Fillmore, if we were to go forward with Fillmore?
Yeah, or like at Truman, so, the preschool teacher, I'm assuming, is paid through the voluntary preschool funding?
Yes, the statewide voluntary preschool.
Okay, and then is that also then paying for some portion of utilities or any portion of administration?
It pays for a portion of the administration.
Okay.
The statewide voluntary funds
Okay.
do. As far as, and I don't have my budget specialist here to tell me everything, Marcia might be able to help me out a little bit. As far as like the...
Well, you do know how many students it takes.
Mhm.
Was it 20 in the AM and 20 in the PM would offset the cost of a teacher in the para? Wasn't that the numbers we were using?
Yeah, that's the numbers we were using, because we figure roughly $3,000 per child is what we receive from the state. for
Okay.
flow-through funding.
Okay.
So if we have two sections of 20, we're
Okay.
looking at $120,000.
Okay,
that we
and
receive
that
for those
doesn't,
kiddos.
but that doesn't, so it's a per child, the amounts, okay. So, because I'm trying to think, if we do this addition, or an additional addition to Fillmore, that will create some utility need, but that will probably, can we make an allowance for that in terms of when we are looking at staff for the preschool classrooms and administration for the preschool classrooms? Can we encompass that in the whole picture, the utilities cost and the cleaning and all sorts of that?
That, I believe, would come out of a different funding source.
Okay, it would?
I believe so, yes.
Marcia probably could answer better, but I understand like at Hayes where there's a program at Truman, the custodial, the nurse, those kinds of things are just absorbed in the general school budget.
We do have money that we use from the tuition that's received at the villages to cover those overhead costs like the custodial and the utilities and that. So as much as we can from that pot of money, we use the tuition money to pay for part of that.
Okay, so are we actually dipping into our general fund at all for preschool in the main school buildings?
The last time I looked at the budget for the preschools, we were not using any general fund dollars.
Okay.
For supporting that program.
So I know that we'll have to educate the public on that, but I think that that's an important point to remember, is that this isn't adding an additional burden to our general fund. This is just allocating preschool education for students inside of our buildings. And I've kind of been biting my tongue a little bit, waiting to express my enthusiasm for this idea, because I think when we talk about poverty and making the schools a community hub, there's nothing like dropping off your preschool child and your older children and just really getting a feel for your neighborhood school and wanting to be involved starting at that early age when kids are, let's be honest, more enthusiastic about school. They, for various sets of reasons, get less enthusiastic as they get older. But in preschool, they really want mom and dad to come. And then once mom and dad are invested, then they want to keep participating and they keep their students involved. We've talked a little bit about the village system, and I don't know if I would characterize that as a mistake. I think that it's an alternative that doesn't necessarily reach a lot of the populations that we're trying to reach out to, the ones that aren't being served. So I lost my train of thought too.
I guess it's getting kind of late. Luke, you've been wanting to get in there.
Is there a way to make sure that if we do these preschools, that they're not just drawing kids away from the private preschools? Because we're paying a lot of the private preschools some money for them to be offering these services, and it seems like it'd be terribly inefficient if we just did this and then they all just switched over.
That would not be our focus by any means. It's
Okay.
trying to reach those students out there that are not receiving services whatsoever at this point.
Okay.
Actually, I had a conversation with the director at the Y, and ran all this by her too, and she said no, she would not see that as a threat.
Okay.
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, I want to follow up on Jamie's point. First, I want to address something that Maria brought up, general fund dollars. I still think that there's a bang for your buck kind of thing here that we have to take into account, that sometimes when we spend dollars up the chain, higher up in the educational grade structure, those dollars aren't nearly as productive as dollars spent at the preschool and early elementary level. So whether or not we use general fund dollars at the preschool level in the interest of public interest, in the interest of our taxpayers, that's still the most fiscally responsible thing we could do as far as I'm concerned. So thinking how we shift resources from upper grades to this area makes a lot of sense, always had made sense to me. So not relying only on title money and so forth, to make to expand these systems that we know work and have, and if you look at the fiscal benefits that the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank, has done on these things. So they're talking about as much as $1 returns $15, as much as that, but at least $5 for every buck that you put in comes back to the taxpayers as far as lack of services down the road. So this makes a lot of sense. And Jamie's point, what are our relationships with social services as far as identifying these folks? Most of these folks, we're talking about poverty, so most of these folks are receiving services. Have we talked to social services about identifying these kids so that we know where they are? What kind of data collection do we do there?
To my knowledge, we haven't done any at this point. We rely, I don't want to say rely, but we have that cooperation with or collaboration with Head Start, and I believe they're able to identify some of the students, and they do serve some of those students. But as far as social services, we haven't gotten that
I know they have,
that far, so.
the HIPAA issues and all that, but I think that they probably can find a way to assist you in identifying, at least presenting to these families the options available to them so we know they're there, and give us better figures. They can give us blind figures on these things, better figures about how many folks are actually out there that are not receiving services. They can at least gather that kind of information. And I think Jamie's right. I think some of that data would be critical to our planning, too. Thanks.
Director Crumwoody.
I really don't have a concern about filling those preschools. I would say if we build them, they will come. And if you would like to have a conversation with the principal at Monroe, he doesn't have preschools right down there right now. I would say if they have them, they'll be there. Truman School, back when it was 30% free and reduced lunch, I had 6 preschool programs at Truman, 6, that served almost every kindergartner that came in to Truman. And for a couple of years, I think they were down to 2, which served just a part of their population. They've turned around now and they've changed the program where they now have 3 to our programs, serving 51 students, which is going to be the majority of their kids. If we look at our schools that have the greatest needs, I feel that those preschools would be filled right away if we communicated in the neighborhood and let them know that that preschool option is available to them. My conversation with TJ Schneckloff is that the nearest preschool is up the hill at the Putnam. If you're a single mother with 3 children and you got a preschooler, you're not going to let that little kiddo walk up to the Putnam if he lives down south of Monroe School. So there's not access, and I've said that for so long. We don't have accessible preschool in this district, and we need to make it accessible if we really believe, and that was one of our priorities in the Iowa School Board Association, if we believe every 4-year-old should be in preschool, then we really need to make efforts to make that happen. And this whole situation with Fillmore, here's an opportunity right before us. It's going to be filled. If we build it, they're going to come.
Director Dickman.
Some of the things we've talked about so far are the impacts of poverty, and also the when we invest dollars into helping students succeed, and all of the new research on biology and neuroscience and all that is pointing to if we do early interventions, then we're saving money in the long run by not having to do intensive interventions later in life, and that it does reduce the achievement gap. So I think it does seem like the direction is pointing that there seems to be a consensus that this is overall a good idea. And then also the curriculum, currently there are some students who are being served in the preschool need, but they're being underserved or potentially underserved. And if they're in our buildings, not only are they getting familiar with our teachers and our principals, but we know what they're learning, and we can have oversight over what they're learning to make sure that it's going to be those skills that will serve them as they continue to grow older.
Director Kluhl.
I don't know how many translations of the Bible there are, but it's hard to come up with another rationale for why early childhood intervention is important in preschool programs. But I have to do something here because it's been kind of quiet from my mic. I believe strongly in early childhood. Even we had Scott County Kids, we had somebody come in from the Fed and come in and talk to us about early childhood. And even they supported the importance of early childhood at the Fed. This was with when Greenspan was in office, but that hasn't changed. So But I'm thinking this whole thing kind of bubbled up as something that we thought was very important, and I'm thinking, you know, the transmission of information from a committee to the board, how that best happens. It's almost like if we had taped our session, we could have played that for the board, and so many of your questions would have been answered. It's a very curious board. But I think Director DeFau talked about the fact that we need to open this up for discussion, and I think it is a very important issue for discussion. For me, it's a district of distinction issue. I think this, for me, is something that parents would flock to. I think it's good for kids. I think we develop some loyalty to our schools. I think there's every reason that it makes a lot of sense. But as I mentioned early on in the board meeting when I was talking about the priorities and the fact that one of our main goals as boards is to reflect the public value. And we've got information here from a poverty meeting that the principals attended, and they said as far as programs, put a preschool class in every elementary school. Well, we seem to have some buy-in there, but what does the public think about this? We've done, I think, a really good job of going out to the public and assessing what their needs are, what are their values. I don't know if the public values this as much as we do, but I think we owe it to them as elected officials to ascertain what is your value. Do you find value in preschools, in our elementary schools? I presume they would, but I don't know. So I think that's something that this board should pursue in part of that bigger discussion, which I think is entirely correct.
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, Rich. I just had a conversation with a staff member today about one of my concerns was that we start things and they kind of fade off. And so one of the things I was impressed with a year and a half or so ago, we had a big meeting with the realtors in the area and did a presentation on Davenport schools. And there was a big follow through with different events and things. And that was all very impressive. And I said, what are we doing to follow up on that? What's happening? And I'm told that there's another meeting planned in the near future, early late in the winter, to do a similar kind of thing, and that these things are ongoing. People are going out and talking to realtors and doing the kind of things that I'd hoped that we would be doing. But I'm wondering if this is part of the message, if our preschool efforts are part of the message, because I do think we are a leader in this area. I want to make sure that this becomes part of our message to those folks too, because you're absolutely right. We need to let the community know what we're doing, and we don't want only low-income folks in there. We're trying to reach out to those folks, but we would like to see everybody come to our preschools that want to take advantage of these things, because it does then naturally lead into our buildings, and it is a district of distinction kind of issue as far as building our numbers and the status of this organization. So I hope this is part of all of our messages that are going out to the community. So,
anybody else? Well, a couple of things. One, Director DeFau early on in this discussion talked about vision. There were references to the long-range plan, which this discussion would lead into that as part of our philosophy and as part of our direction. I thought about this board, and I thought about how important it is, especially for those of you that are planning on not running next year, that we have this discussion soon. And I believe the administration is planning on having a presentation on the long-range plan within a few months. Is that accurate?
The end of February or beginning of March, yes.
All right, thank you. And so we have a little bit of chicken and egg problems. But hopefully that discussion will be structured appropriately so that we can talk about the importance of preschool classes in traditional schools. And I think the idea of vision is something that somehow we'll try to address, I think, before then if possible. But some of this, there's some timing issues here too that I haven't been able to resolve. I just wanted everybody to be aware of that. Any other discussion? Superintendent Tate.
Mr. Maloney, would you come back up? I need to ask you, I think, the pertinent question. what is the drop dead date that we must approve any additions to the Fillmore construction so that it would be done by the time school starts next year?
If you decided, I think, after your January 12th meeting, it would be very difficult to complete.
Okay. So you're saying January 12th should be the drop dead date?
For
For
including that
adding
in the current project, I think it would be very, very difficult after that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Okay. Thank you for standing up there all that time, Tammy.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. We'll move on to the next discussion item. It's 8 o'clock. How long do you think this may take a bit? All right. Why don't we take a 5-minute recess then? And we'll come back and we'll discuss amending the diversity plan.
To be honest. Let's watch TV. Let's watch TV.
Thank you for bringing it.
Open the book. I'll even open the book and I'll like take out my laptop. There's like a tab with like stuff. And I'll stare at it a few times. I type 3 words. And then I'm gonna decide, you know what, it's no. And then when I'm 12, I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna do this. And then in like half an hour, I literally do everything. I love that. I love that. Like burst of energy. Just like but then afterwards, you get you're just like super pumped. Yeah, you're like real hair. For years. And I've always hated to do it, so now I just wait. And then what sucks is when you can't do it all of a sudden because then you have all this energy. You're just like, I can't. Yeah, that's probably.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Tate.
All right, board, you want to come on back and we'll get started to finish this. Is Director Crumwitty in the room? All right, next discussion item is amending the diversity plan. The superintendent has some of the information available. However, we're going to ask Director DeFau to open the discussion and give a little bit of history, background on the diversity plan. Director DeFau.
Thank you. And I'm going to, I'm not going to subject people to a whole backstory about how we got to the diversity plan, but I will share how we got to this evening. And the diversity plan is a plan that we use to determine and hopefully curtail movement out of district through out of district transfer. And basically we use the status of a student's socioeconomic status based on free and reduced lunch, and then their academic performance. And Dr. Tate came to the policy committee at our last meeting and informed us that there had been a change in our other programming that necessitated a change to the diversity plan. And primarily that is based upon the fact that several of our buildings now are building-wide eligible for no-cost lunch through federal programming that was offered last year and that was implemented by the board. So with that, we can no longer use free and reduced lunch status because there's no way to differentiate students in those 17 buildings. As a result, he came to us with a proposal as a way to modify the plan so that we would still be looking at the same student population when we are determining who is eligible to transfer out of district. So with that, I'd ask Dr. Tate to further explain that.
Thank you, Director DeFau. We approved, you approved us going to what's called the Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP, in October. And when that happened, as Director DeFau said, 17 of our schools, all the students there automatically were able to receive free and reduced lunch. And they did that without having to fill out the application for free and reduced meal benefits, which is something we used to really push to have all of our parents do each year. And then that would give us, for every student in the district, whether they were considered to be on free and reduced lunch. When the diversity plan was written, the requirement was to identify ways that you would be able to characterize your district in order to actually put restrictions on people who left for for open enrollment. And so the board picked two things: the student academic performance, and the second part of the demographic characteristic was paid, free, and reduced lunch. So going forward, when we go to open enrollment this season, we have 17 schools that we have no one who's on free and reduced lunch. There may be a few. If a parent has students in two schools, he or she may have in fact filled out the form, so there may be a student in one of those 17 schools that actually we can identify as free and reduced lunch. So I put together a group of people to try to figure something that we could measure and still stick with the spirit of the diversity plan if that's what the board wanted to do. So we came up with what's called the Household Economic Survey. And that is a survey that people have to fill out if they want to get their semester fees waived. They can also fill that out if they want to use our after-school programs. And in the past, if you wanted to have your fees waived on your normal application for free and reduced, there was a block. So we know exactly that not only do they get free and reduced lunch, but they get their fees waived. So now it is a separate application that they do if they want their fees waived, and that's what's being used for the people who are in these 17 schools. And so we've made that available in their registration packets. We've made it available online. We've made sure that the schools have advertised that fact so that people will in fact be able to have their fees waived. And I asked them to do some comparison. Look at, in the 17 schools, the number of people last year who had filled out the free and reduced compared to this year, how many had done the Household Economic Survey. And we're right now at about 80% of the people, which I thought was pretty good, especially since our enrollment has reduced somewhat. I think it's probably more than 80%. So having just started the program, I think that's great. We'll pick up people as they continue to get their bills for their waivers, and we continue to try to track them and let them know they haven't paid their bills, and it will hit them that in the past they used to just fill out the application for free and reduced, but this year they have to do a separate form. So my recommendation is that I'm looking on page 1 of our diversity plan where it says the key demographic characteristics include, and you've got the student academic performance and paid, free, and reduced lunch, because some of our students still are designated that way if they're not in those 17 schools, then comma, Household Economic Survey fee waiver. And that would then put us, again, I think the same philosophical bent where the board started with this is trying to identify a feature that had to do with poverty or socioeconomic status. So I'm recommending that the board use that in the diversity plan, and I've gone through the plan, and I think we've hit every place where they had free and reduced lunch, and we've added or have a fee waiver or has a fee waiver, and our tables that show exactly how the calculations are done. I've also added free and reduced lunch or fee waivers. And so I'm recommending the board talk about this tonight. Last time we made some small modification of this. Wendy Meyer did not suggest that we need to send it to the Department of Education. I sent my packet to her, and she's looked at that, and she indicates that any major changes needs a 60-day window before you can actually approve it. So if, in fact, you come back the first meeting in January and you decide, yes, this is a change we want to make, and we have to submit it to the Department of Education, and it takes 60 days. Hopefully we can get sooner because there's some pretty minor modifications. They can come back and say yes, and then it will go into effect. So I've got Dawn Anderson-Rascher here in case we have any questions about the calculations at all, but I'd welcome any questions or discussions about my recommendations.
All right. Thank you for those introductions. Discussion. Director Snyder.
If these minor changes get us to where we need to be, I guess I'm under the philosophy that if it isn't broke, let's not fix it. I think if this gets it done, I don't see any reason to complicate it, because we are required to use this diversity plan for in-district transfers the same as out-of-district, correct?
That is true. Your policy indicates that a B student, for example, if in fact they apply before, I think we have a date in April or May, then they can transfer to an A student, an A student can transfer to a B school. So yes, it is for determining internal transfers.
Did you have more, Director Snyder?
No.
Director Sherwood.
Yeah, and it does not apply to the high schools, but the elementary and intermediates.
That's true because, well, it does intermediate.
I said the elementary and intermediates it applies to, but not the high schools.
Right, not the high schools.
Since we had that battle on the, just to make sure we clarified. So when you presented this at the policy committee, I've thought about this. I don't see any other alternative that makes any sense. I don't think personally that you're going to get up to 100% previously, because the range of free and reduced runs from very severe poverty to what we would consider very marginal poverty issues. I think 43,000 is the top end of this thing, something like that for a family of four for free and reduced. So I think some of those families are going to probably not ask for fee waivers. They may have if they were filling out that original form, but I'm not sure that they will independently of that. But I don't see a better solution. I do have a question about these 17 schools. Now, with our mobility, do we have any issues with kids receiving free and reduced when they move from one of these schools into another school when they haven't filled out forms? Is there any lag time there? The kids aren't, are we feeding these kids? How are we treating them?
Wow, that's a great question. I really don't know. I'm sure they try to get the form going as quickly as possible. I just don't know the answer, but
yeah,
I'm glad you asked it.
I would hope that we would instruct our schools that these kids, based on their parents' statement, would at least get temporary services and until we get the paperwork done. So, but other than that, I think this is, for me, it's just what it is.
Anybody else? Director Kluhl?
Well, first of all, I agree that the change in SES demarcation is appropriate, but I just wanted to spend a minute and a half venting, and at some point in time I'll get over my frustration with the Supreme Court in 2007 in saying that we could no longer use race as the sole basis for what was then a desegregation plan, now a diversity plan. So to say that it ain't broke is an interesting comment historically, because we ran this diversity plan through very quickly. We were pressed for time. We had to make it happen. There were several people on the board that felt that race needed to continue to be a part of our new diversity plan. It wasn't. We were in a rush, and we did what we had to do. But I think the Supreme Court's position was that we're a colorblind society, and that we're no longer going to use race as a means for integrating our schools. I think that recent issues, national issues that have occurred, clearly indicate that we are not a colorblind society. And so you know, what was once a desegregation plan that talked about minorities being folks of color, now we mention race one time in this diversity plan. So I'm a bit frustrated by that, but I recognize that this board has a lot of important things to do, and trying to work this out with the Department of Ed could be a very convoluted process, and I don't even know if our legal folks would want to go forward with using race as one of the factors. I still don't agree with the student academic performance as a means of defining a minority. I understand that it has some impact, but I don't think that I don't think it's the right measure. So anyway, my little diatribe, and perhaps I'll get over this frustration, but I'm sorry to have to give this to the board again, but it's just a frustration, and maybe it will get better. I don't know. But I do concur with the fact that, yes, we have to change this means of trying to assess SES status.
Anybody else? Director Crumwitty?
Well, Director Kluhl took some of my words away. The diversity plan was a very difficult issue to deal with. When we had to deal with this, it was rushed, but we had to get it done. And it was a very difficult conversation. And some of us on the board at the time had some very strong feelings about the end product of the diversity plan. But we all agreed to it, and we went ahead and adopted that plan. I'm really glad to hear that we are running this by the Department of Education, because I do remember those conversations with our legal counsel, in that if we do make some significant changes, that's going to be an issue for our board. So hopefully they'll agree. But my question is this: what if the department says no, you can't do that? Then are we thinking of other kind of alternatives if they see this as a major change to the plan?
I can't imagine they would. I'm sure, and again, I don't know the diversity plans of the other districts that have them, but when we went to the community eligibility provision, I'm sure everyone did the same thing as we are. Oh my gosh, how do we count it? And that's the only alternative I see. So I can't imagine that they would not approve it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other discussion? Director Dickman.
Yeah, I appreciate Director Kluhl's frustration, and I certainly do not think that we are in a colorblind society. We're facing resegregation in many ways, but I don't think that this is the place to address this right now because of the legal wrangling and problems. I do hope that as we go forward, we will continue to keep in mind that how race affects our students, our lives, our culture. But I do support having this minor change in our diversity plan, and doing the best we can with the tools we have.
Anybody else? Director DeFau.
Do you have any comments before?
Yes.
Okay, then perhaps it would be more appropriate for you to share your comments. I'm going to summarize.
Okay, great. I would like to ask, because I did miss the policy committee meeting, but I just want to ask, on the statistical representations, with this change, Dawn, do you imagine that the statistics are going to look about the same? Will we have the same number of schools above and below the district average? How will this affect open enrollment?
I would hope it'd be pretty close to the same. It's been the same ratio probably for the last 5 years. Again, if we go by the home economic survey, not everyone fills those out. And so if we are using that, if we have no other indication, they would then be considered full pay. So it could make some minor adjustments, but if we have 80% of our staff or our parents filling it out that aren't filling out the free and reduced lunch form, then it should be pretty close to the same. How will it impact? If the numbers are pretty much the same, it's really going to depend on who applies, the A category students or the B category students. And we release all our A category students, and then the B category students are those that it's based on that ratio. In this case, it's a 9-to-5 ratio. So for every 9 A category students we let out, we can let out 5 B category students. And then it also depends on siblings too.
We have, for instance, if we have an A category student who has their a student and they have 2 siblings that are B category students, those 3 go also. And it can also depend on, we have, for open enrollment, we have students where they have an older sibling that has already been approved for open enrollment, and now we have a kindergarten student, they automatically are let go because we do not break out families. That's been our policy, or actually our procedure. So it's not going to impact any of that. It's just going to really depend on the number of applications that we do receive.
The 9 to 5, you've got a ratio of 1.8, and is that proportional to the 9 to 5?
Yes.
And in what way?
9,
is that just the
9
inverse?
divided by 5.
Okay, all right.
Is 1.8.
And you've looked at this every year that we've had it. We've had it 9 years or something. I don't know.
This would be my 4th year coming up.
But you probably looked at
Yes.
at it before then. Can you say what the trend is? Is it just kind of moseying along? Is it moving in one direction or the other?
The trend as far as the ratio?
Yes,
or
as far as the ratio.
the ratio's been the same for the last 4 or 5 years. It's still 9 to 5. It has not changed. So it's kind of, if you, I guess using your term, moseying along, just.
Okay. Just a couple other comments. One is that I was really frustrated with the Supreme Court's decision and the way, frankly, that our lawyers interpreted the decision. There was a lot of pressure back then to go ahead and get this done. And my read on the Supreme Court ruling was different from the guidance that we were given, but we were given guidance based on their interpretation of the ruling. And I think this is really the only place that we talk about these types of issues in any of our policies. I don't remember anything else really addressing this. And at some point, I know that we've got a lot of other things to do. I'm frustrated with some of the language in here, but it would take forever to try and change it beyond what has been recommended. And so I will support the recommendations. That's all I have. Oh, sure.
Yeah. On page 4, the second paragraph from the bottom talks about how we deal with siblings. Part of that has to do with state law, to my understanding, and part of it has to do with policy and philosophy of the district. When next I bring this to you, I want to be a little bit firmer on which is state law and which is district policy, and perhaps offer some alternatives to you. For example, if we're doing a lottery and we have 20 families that are there, if we have a family with 4 siblings and even any one of those lottery chips is picked out, then all 4 of them get to go. I'm not sure how fair that is. So I want to rethink about that, but I want to make sure I'm on firm footing with the law, just because, again, I think maybe we're being a little bit too generous with the siblings, and I'll, as I said, let me do some more thinking about it, show you what the law says, and then see what you're thinking.
Director DeFowl, you should have been leading this thing the whole time. I apologize. But why don't you go ahead, take over.
I have no intention of taking over. But I will say, I was originally going to suggest that the policy committee would bring forward for a vote this plan at the next regularly scheduled board meeting based upon the conversation that we had. We have a policy committee meeting that first week in January. However, based upon Dr. Tate's comments that he would in fact be bringing us a suggested revision, I'm not able to do that. So I just want to be mindful of the fact that that is going to delay our decision, which will delay our, in turn, submitting this to the Department of Education for approval. So Dr. Tate, is that something that you are comfortable with? Also knowing that if you don't bring forward your suggested revision, that it's going to necessitate another visit to this plan, potentially with a different board, depending on timing.
Actually, I would just like to get it done, so let's just leave the provision about siblings as it is. It's not that huge of an impact, and I'd rather just see us get her done.
Get her done.
So I would ask them by consensus of the board.
Could I just ask one more
Certainly.
question? Can you tell us how, we know that there's 200 that we, students that we lost this year. How many of those were open enrolled?
Those 200 wouldn't be counted in the open enrolled.
Okay. How many did we open enroll?
That's a difficult question. I can tell you that we approved 74 students to be open enrolled out.
74 students.
That's new students, but we also realize that the students that continue in their open enrollment, so
Right.
we'd have that count. And then we also have the state has, if a student attends a school district and they want to continue their educational program within that school district, but they move into another school district, they can. So they're kind of, in a sense, considered open enrolled, but it would be nothing that we could deny.
Right, I understand.
And I
So,
don't have that number
right.
with me right now.
My question would be, when we talk about these numbers, we're talking total number of students. We don't talk in Dr. Tate's terms, how many families. And I'd be very interested to know how many families are out of our district. Because this ratio thing, and it gets to your point of fairness, I think, a little bit, Dr. Tate. We don't like to break up families, and I think that's really valid. But at the same time, if families are taking 3 or 4 slots of this open enrollment, one family, then that's denying other families who want to have that benefit access to that. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there is an issue of fairness here that should be debated, because the folks that are denied those based on large sibling numbers should have their voice heard as well. And I don't know that has happened since I've been on this board, at least. I think that's a point of view that deserves some attention.
What's the deadline for open enrollment applications?
March 1st.
Yeah.
So we're on a timeline here if we want to use the home economics survey.
Okay.
When is the actual lottery held then?
The lottery is held, I think Marcine notifies the parents like April 5th, April 1st. So we have the lottery about the middle of March, because there's a deadline that she does need to notify the families if they're approved or denied.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Director Dickman had asked first.
Just a quick clarification question. So say there were 9 A students that put in applications to go to open enroll out. So that would leave 5 then spaces for B students.
Correct.
And so however many students are applying, if one of the students who applies wins the lottery and they have a sibling, are there then 3 spots left in the lottery or 4 spots left in the lottery?
There are 3 spots left in the lottery unless it's the last student chosen.
Okay.
And we've had that happen the last 2 years.
Okay.
Where the last lottery slot had siblings that went with it. So the numbers were above what we had approved because of the sibling.
Okay, and then also for a sibling of a student who is already open enrolled, is that counted in the slots for the current year? So student
Yes, they would.
okay.
They are counted.
Okay.
They would have to apply for that student as a new student.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to figure out the timing on all this. Our next regular board meeting is January 12th. And if there's a 60-day waiting time with the department, and I'm anticipating that that's before not the lottery, but the deadline for applications. And we would be 12 days or 13 days late, wouldn't we, if we don't approve this before January 12th? I'm trying to interpret what the rules are.
If it takes 60 days, and if after we show Wendy exactly what we end up with, if she believes it's major, last time we didn't have to submit it. We just made the changes, so I think there's a couple ifs there, and I just don't know the answer.
Okay.
And if the DE, I can't imagine they would take 60 days to look at these small changes. It would seem like I could get it faster, but I cannot say that.
So if we need to, we could have a special meeting. If you review this with Wendy and she says, hey, you better plan on 60 days, we could have a meeting yet in December. The other thing is the issue of fairness that Director Sherwood brought up is something I've never even thought of. And but I don't know that there's a way to even figure that out before we have to address the issue to get it done for this year. And so I think in general I support the idea of making sure we get it done for this year. And then maybe at some time in the future we look at the fairness issue, and maybe we want to make other modifications before next September. That's all I got.
And, Director Snyder.
My question is, how does this come into play, or does it, with No Child Left Behind? Does No Child Left Behind trump our diversity plan? Or does it come into play, and are we not in any legal compliance in regards to...
I'm not sure what you're asking, No Child Left Behind. If it's No Child Left Behind, you're talking about SINA schools. Those are schools within our district. So this would not apply
okay.
To that.
Anything else from the board? Okay. And I will just, in regard to the line of regarding fairness, I think my response when Dr. Tate mentioned this in the policy committee, and I'm glad, Dawn, that you initiated that conversation because it was a prompt for me. My comment was that I believe if we're going to have a policy that says sibling groups do not move out of district as a unit but are evaluated on an individual basis, then you have to do the same thing for in-district transfer when it comes to wanting to move within the district and you have sibling groups and a certain class may be capped within a certain building, so that then you're impacting the number of students that can enroll that reside within the school's boundaries. Again, I think that's a fairness issue. So if we're going to limit it for out of district, I think that we need to give consideration to in district as well. And that is a very large philosophical shift. I know there are huge implications for it, but I don't think you can say we're going to treat, we're going to say this is a fairness issue for one group and not another. So, and then that puts another wrinkle into it altogether. But I would welcome that conversation. With everything that's been said, what I'm getting from the group is that we will be bringing forward the policy with this modification at the next regular board meeting. I don't see anybody suggesting that that's different.
Yep.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you for that discussion. We'll move on to policy. Director DeFau.
And the policy committee did meet last week, as I mentioned previously. And before we look at this policy, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Director Sherwood for the time that he spent with our committee. You know, he's given us valuable input for the last few years, and I'm very appreciative of. As part of our succession planning and looking to the future and the election, though Director Sherwood did agree graciously to step aside so that Director Dickman could join the policy committee in order to get some experience before those transitions would occur. So Director Dickman is now assuming a role on the policy committee, which will consist of Director Dickman, Director Snyder, President Johansson, and myself. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so moving on, we have one policy to present to you this evening, and it's 80205, and it's Board of Directors self-evaluation. And we bring this forward as we have a self-evaluation scheduled sometime in the near future, January, I believe. And with that, we thought it was appropriate to review the policy, which was last looked at in November of 2009. We didn't review it to make any recommended changes. We felt that it was fairly straightforward. So are there any comments? Okay. If not, then I assume the policy committee will again bring this policy forward for vote at our next regular board meeting.
All right, thank you for that. We'll move to administrative reports.
None, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Are there any board reports or requests? I haven't been receiving any requests during the evening. Oh, a little bit coming here. Board reports, Director DeFau.
Just an invitation to members of the board. Davenport North will be hosting its combined holiday concert, the final of the semester, this coming Monday the 15th, and it's purposefully scheduled on our free board night. So if you have the opportunity, you would be in for a real treat.
Director Dickman.
I had the opportunity on Friday to join the regional vision process that the Quad City Chamber of Commerce is spearheading. It was a very exciting and cool process. They mission statement they're working on is to tag the QC, and the idea is to go on your social media, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and tag some friends and tell them why you think a certain location is cool, creative, and prosperous. So I shared a picture of the family museum with my wonderful daughter and explained why I thought it was cool, creative, and prosperous. We also got to hear from the mayor of the city of Oklahoma, talking about how they've leveraged public funds to create private investment and how it has caused their region to grow both in popularity and in size, and brought a great deal of culture. And I think we should all be very excited to see where this movement is going.
Thank you. Director Sherwood.
I first of all want to congratulate the Unified Bands that did the Messiah concert. Every year it just knocks me out how you take that many kids with that diverse of talent and make them sound like the Boston Philharmonic is just amazing. The choral work was astounding. Some of the voices are just mesmerizing. I mean, it's just an amazing event, and I hope someday we film that thing and get it on to the public cable channel so that the world can see what our kids are capable of. It really is amazing. And then I attended also the event at Central along with Jamie that Dr. Tate referenced before, the Fallen Soldier event that the ROTC kids there did. Very well done. I think that I'd like to see a whole lot more members of the community there. It should be a bigger group than it was. because it's a very prideful and solemn thing to reflect on, and I think it causes us to as a community to think about not only the heroism of these kids that sacrifice themselves, but how casually sometimes we send them in harm's way, and how we let others make that decision for us when it's our children we're putting in harm's way. So those are the kind of things I think you reflect on in moments like that when you have to confront the dark statistics of war. Anyway, congratulations to the Central ROTC. They did a great job. The chaplain from First Army was, like most chaplains, but he was very, very good. And Dr. Tate did a presentation. And by the way, Dr. Tate looked great in that uniform. Maybe you should wear it to a board meeting one of these days. But very impressive stuff. And then a couple of things. I attended Saturday a presentation by IPERS on the status of the upcoming legislative thing with the needs of the schools, and it sounded very much like ISEA and UEN as far as what they're asking for, and their analysis very much like what we heard in Des Moines. I think they did have one point that was brought up that I wanted to bring up, and this is what I started to talk about earlier. When the presentation was done on the audits, and it was talked about here that about IPERS transferring this deficit to us that we had to then repay. I understand it was presented to you that was a real possibility that we're going to have to come up with dollars to do that. Is that your understanding? Because I'm assured by an accountant at ISEA and by state legislators that that's not the case, that this is strictly a paperwork thing and has no possibility of ever being called upon for us to pay out. And they encouraged us to ask the Department of Education's specialist on this thing to come and talk to us about this, because they're quite sure that that's not the case. So rather than create a sense of panic on this board, I would encourage you to listen to some of the information that I listened to as well, to ask one of those folks to come in and to clarify this, because my sense is that the information you got was incomplete. So there would be that. And the last thing I want to mention is we talk about these building projects, and we all have to remember there's a sunset on this 1 cent. And we have to be advocating for that 1 cent this entire legislative session. And every time we come together, we need to be talking about it, because that's what distinguishes us from Illinois. And I hate to point to Illinois with the fingers, but our facilities compared to Illinois and a lot of states in this country are top notch because of that 1 cent. And we're able to do some of these things that Maria thinks are extravagant because of that 1 cent. And I personally don't think there's much we can do for kids that's extravagant. If we can afford to do it, I think we should do it. But we want to get these projects finished. That means we have to all be advocates for that 1 cent for this year. And I know that's a policy or thing of the ISEA to do that. I mean, the ISEA, the School Board Association, Ken and these guys have pushed that, but we have to remember that every time we come together, that 1 cent is in peril, and we have to support it. Thanks.
Any other reports? Director Snyder.
Bill pretty well said everything I wanted to say on the holiday concert and the program at Central, but I did want to mention one particular young lady who did an outstanding job stepping up to take control of that. And I wrote her name down, and I forgot it in the car, but I believe it was Mackenzie Gibson. Did an outstanding job, and she did Central very proud, as well as her ROTC program. Her speaking was outstanding, heartfelt, and it was a great program.
Director Crumwoody.
I also had an opportunity to attend the Messiah concert by all 4 high schools. And it's all been said. It was outstanding. I've received several comments from the public who attended that. And I think it was Director Sherwood said that we should encourage that program to be taped, because I've also had conversations with people that saying, I don't know, I didn't know about this concert, or I would have attended. So anyway, maybe we can communicate that more. And I'm certainly going to miss my front row seat at that concert.
Any other reports? Director Snyder.
Actually, Ken said something very, very important that we forgot to mention, and that was this is the first year that Mid-City was involved in that. All 4 high schools was key, and that was good to see.
Anything else? All right, I just have one request from Director Crumwitty, December 8th, 2014, information request. Could we get a list of these item 1, 17 CEP schools, and number 2, the title schools? That's it. It looks like I could entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. This meeting is adjourned.